We then cut to the woman again. Now she's sitting in a chair, and it looks like her eyeballs are missing. There's another woman in the room pacing around. The woman in the chair begins to count backwards from 10 in an inhuman, spooky voice. We then cut to some kind of SWAT team. They're in their vehicle. They're getting ready to rock and roll. It's very ham-fisted. It's very obvious that the director of this has seen the movie Aliens by James Cameron and liked how the Marines were in that scene where they were getting ready to go fight the xenomorphs. It's very much that kind of atmosphere. Also, none of the characters in this segment really matter, so names aren't super important. The only ones of note are Slater, who's he's a bald guy and he's the worst actor in human history. And then we also have Gary, the cameraman, and he's not Gary from the first movie's framing narrative. This is a different Gary, but he's still in the framing narrative. So this is the second VHS film to have a framing segment with a character named Gary. It's not weird by itself, it's just weird that that's happened twice. Oh, and there's two women on the SWAT team. Maybe their names were said at some point, but I don't remember their names. And you don't really need to either. So anyways, they're all in their van. They're getting ready to rock and roll. They're getting ready to raid this drug facility where people are distributing goop, some kind of psychoactive sludge. Don't worry about that because, well, you'll find out why. And they get inside the facility, and it's like, it's the weirdest building ever made, to the point where it's obviously not a building. As you'll find out, it's clearly just different, like, sets, but they threw it all in there. So this building is like a combination of like a school, an airport, and a prison. It's got everything. So they were like walking around and they find a dead body of like a guy, and he's in a jail cell on a couch. And there's a TV set up. It's like set up like a living room inside the jail cell. There's a whole jail full of these little jail cells with little couches, and a guy's sitting there, and he's clearly dead. His eyeballs are missing. He's clearly possibly taken out his own eyeballs. One of the members of the teams remarks that he knows the guy, that it's a local VHS video store proprietor that he knows of. And now for the Zoomers in the audience who may not know what a video store is, back in the day, you used to ask your mom and dad on a Friday night to go down to the video store. It was like a red box, but an entire building. And you'd go inside and you'd rent Banjo-Kazooie and Mortal Kombat on VHS. And then you'd get like a box of snow caps and maybe like a bottle of Sprite. And then you'd go home and you would play Banjo-Kazooie and hope it was the same one you rented last time that your save file was on. And it probably wouldn't be, but it is what it is. So anyways, back to our dumb story. They walk around and they find some dead bodies and they find some goop, and they're like, "Oh, it's so spooky!" And listen, I had a really detailed script written out for this whole thing. I actually write scripts for most of the videos I do, and then I never use them. I wrote a detailed script for each segment, and this one I'm just kind of glazing over because this segment is garbage. I'm just going to be upfront with you right now, spoil my review part of it. The segment sucks. Basically, they just walk around this facility, go into a bunch of different spooky rooms. They get whittled down in between the story segments, like they cut back and then members of the team are gone. Finally, it kind of gets going a little bit where we cut back at one point to Gary, and he's laying on the ground and he's like all covered in blood, and one of the female SWAT team people comes up to him and he's like, "Help me, you said no one would get hurt." And she's like, "Someone always gets hurt." And then she reveals that she's in on it with the terrorists or the drug dealers or whatever this is. Oh, hold on. There's a part I forgot to mention earlier where Slater, he finds a bunch of dead bodies and he turns to the camera and, "Let's have a listen. And by the way, whoever owns the copyright to this movie, this isn't being used in fair use. I am producing a review. This is commentary. It's transformative." Anyways, here is Slater's Oscar-winning line delivery, the greatest line delivery in human history.
We need a grave
Because when I find a dead body, my first concern is proper disposal, as well as monster trucks. So anyways, Slater gets kidnapped by the evil woman. Oh, and also the other woman on the team is also evil. And they bring him back to, like, the main room, and they're like, oh, we're gonna explain our evil plan. And turns out that it's not a drug facility. The goop doesn't exist or doesn't matter, even though we've seen it before. They say that it's actually all because of the tapes. The tapes are the real deal, and that they give one of the dumbest supervillain speeches ever as they're getting changed out of their police clothes into their white dress shirt outfits they're wearing. Anyways, here's their amazing speech. Once again, this is being used in fair use. This is I claim no ownership of this sound clip, but I'm using it merely in fair use. What
the fuck is all of this?
This is a far-out fetish film cult of bootleggers pushing that untouched, untouchable nastiest of the nasties, snuffing and fluffing cannibals, animals, girls in white suits, fucking shit up. We deal in contraband content, strictly VHS, definitely illegal.
They fucked shit up by fluffing animals, I guess. That's girl power. Not much to say other than that it's stupid. Yeah, and then they bash his head in with the camera. I mean, that's kind of a neat idea, I guess, like first-person camera bashing. But do you think the camera would break pretty quickly? I don't know. Anyways, this segment's garbage. Let's move on pretty quickly, because this is the real meat and potatoes of this movie. The framing narratives in these things are usually pretty bad. This is easily the worst of the lot, I have to say, but let's move on. Things can only get better from here. And boy, do they. Our first segment is titled Storm Drain. It is written and directed by Chloe Okuno, another name I'm completely unfamiliar with. Our segment begins with the tail end of a news broadcast talking about the emerging popularity of the World Wide Web. This kind of, just to firmly establish that this is set in 1994. The next story that they cover is about a strange series of eyewitness encounters with a creature dubbed the Rat Man. We then cut to Channel 6's Holly Marciano with more. She's interviewing some of the locals, asking them what they think the Rat Man might be. We get a couple of different takes, one from some teenagers who think he might be an escaped mental patient living in the sewers. We get a message from a creepy guy in front of a church who seems to think that the Rat Man is a messenger from Jesus come to deliver justice. And we also get kind of a talk from a weird gun nut guy outside the sewer drain entrance. Once the main filming is done, Holly and her cameraman, named Jeff, head back to their van. On the way back, Jeff asks Holly if she'd like to go get a drink after work, which Holly takes great offense to. They make it back to the van, and on the phone with their superiors, Holly is told that she needs to get some more footage, so the two head back to the sewers to film more B-roll. After getting the footage they're looking for, the two get ready to leave when they hear a strange, monstrous sound coming from inside the drain. Holly wants to leave still, but Jeff decides it's better to go on deeper because he thinks he saw someone in there. They head a little bit further into the storm drain to see what Jeff saw, and it turns out it was actually just a moldy sleeping bag on top of some pallets. Holly comments on how awful it is the way homeless people are treated in our society despite our vast amounts of wealth. She notices a teddy bear amongst the garbage in the sleeping bag, and she asks Jeff if she thinks there's any kids down here. This causes a bit of a shift in her attitude, as now she wants to make a story out of this. She wants to broadcast his plight. Jeff asks her, oh, don't you have an AA meeting to get to? Which really adds some context to his earlier comment about asking her if she wants to go get a drink after work. Pretty scummy. The two decide to investigate further into the cavernous sewers. The two come across a shadowy figure deep in the sewers. The figure disappears into the shadows, and they notice behind them is a gross, disgusting tent filled with garbage. While investigating the tent, something moves, and it turns out the thing moving is actually an eyeball opening. The mound of garbage was partially garbage and partially a homeless man covered in detritus bolts out of the tent as the two are in shock from the discovery. Holly tries to talk with the disheveled man, but doesn't get much in the way of answers until she asks him about the Rat Man, which causes a shift in his attitude. He begins to drip some kind of gross black fluid from his mouth as he grins eerily. The two have decided now's a good time to hit the old dusty trails and head on out. They begin to flee. At some point, Jeff stops and looks back and realizes Holly's not with him. He debates going back and looking for her, but finally decides that he should probably just head on out. Unfortunately for him, this moment of pause seems to have given the homeless people in the tunnel enough time to catch up with him. They render him unconscious. We then cut to someone filming Holly. She's on the ground, waking up. As she regains her senses, she notices that her hands are bound together with a ligature made out of shopping bags. She pleads with the homeless people, offering to tell their story to the masses, get them help. She is greeted by that creepy church guy from before. He tells her that they will tell their own story. She then notices Jeff, who is on the ground, bound and held by the homeless people. He is placed at the mouth of a tunnel. There's some sort of almost like a baptismal altar in front of the tunnel. Something deep inside begins to stir, and a creature crawls forth out of the tunnel. The creature is a rat-like humanoid, though interestingly enough, it's not what you would think if you were told to picture a rat man. Normally, I think most people would picture something similar to the Skaven from Warhammer, or maybe like Splinter from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Something like a humanoid body with a rat head. This is more akin to a human with a. It's hard to describe. Basically, imagine a human mixed with a xenomorph mixed with a rat. It's got like this long xenomorphic head, but where the nose of the rat would be is a humanoid face almost, but a massive extended jaw. It's crazy looking. It's great. You really should see this for yourself. This thing is fantastic. Anyways, this thing has slavering jaws, dripping, disgusting goop. They take a little bowl of the goop and drizzle it all over Jeff's face. His face begins to bubble and sizzle and steam and screams. It's nasty. Creepy church guy reveals that Jeff was unworthy, which is why he was punished by the Rat Man, or Ratma, as some say. The Rat Man has come to scour the surface world, and the destitute and the dejected in the sewer are to be his worshippers. It's now Holly's turn to take the right. This time, apparently, it's Ratma who will be directly delivering anointing. So she is led before the creature, and the creature begins to drool all over her. She screams as the camera cuts out. Then cut to a fake commercial for some kind of home good product, and then after that commercial ends, we then get a news report covering Holly's rescue from being stuck in a sewer drain. It seems she made it out okay, but our dear friend Jeff, his body was never recovered. No one knows what happened to him. Even better news, Holly's live in the studio with us. Holly begins to give a report on some kind of pumpkin festival, I guess, but her words begin to get jumbled and random words are replaced with Ratma. It becomes obvious that something is wrong with her. She begins to retch and throws up a disgusting black slime all over her co-host. His face begins to melt in the audience, and crew begin to scream, and you can hear them fleeing the room. Holly then turns to the camera, finishes her story, and ends it with a Hail Ratma. My thoughts on this segment are pretty easy to sum up. This is just a great segment. You want it, it's got it. It's got some spooks, it's got some gross out stuff, it's got some comedy, it's got a little social commentary. It's just a complete package. It's got a great monster design, it's got a fun, spooky premise. It's, I think, to my memory, probably the only segment that has really had a sort of dark comedy tone that was handled well. It reminds me of the skateboard segment from VHS Viral, though I think this is better than that one. I think that one had kind of a, bit of a comedic tone to it, kind of a dark comedy. There was some slapstick in there, but overall, I think that was an inferior segment. The only other time I think it really comes close to really working was maybe the ending of Safe Haven when the goat man calls the guy Papa and he begins to crack up hysterically. It's almost like an Evil Dead kind of moment. That's the kind of vibe this gives, I guess. It's sort of an Evil Dead type vibe. It's very kind of Sam Raimi, but it plays that card close to its chest, which I like. On to our next segment. This is The Empty Wake, written and directed by series veteran Simon Barrett, who did the framing narratives for the first two VHS films. He's also done some other bigger movies that you may have heard of or seen as well. He's kind of closest thing we got to a big shot in this franchise. He's even appeared on Best of the Worst by Red Letter Media. Our segment this time concerns a young woman named Haley, which is kind of a not great choice of names just because the last segment was about a girl named Holly. So you think I don't know, name her Stephanie or something. Anyways, Haley is, like, think on her first day as I don't know what exactly you'd call it, wake attendant. I know I used to work at a funeral home for about a year, and the position I filled was assistant funeral director. She seems to have a lot less responsibilities than I did, or is kept out of the loop or something. I don't know. Anyways, she is on her first day, I think, and it's her duty to stay and record the wake for this man who is now deceased and is in a closed casket. By the way, the casket they are using is a rental casket. I can tell by the way it looks. We had a very similar, possibly even the same model casket at my funeral home. It's the kind that's designed for El Cheapo funerals or for people who want to have the body cremated but still want to have a viewing. It's basically a wooden box designed to look like a casket with a hinged door in the back, and you put the person in a cardboard insert and you slide. There's like rollies on the inside of the casket, and you put them on the rollies and kind of roll them in, and then there's this like Velcro lining the inside of the casket that you Velcro on like upholstery to look like it's a nice little upholstered casket, but really it's just kind of like drapes that you like tuck in underneath the person. It's just a fun little factoid. So, anyways, it's a closed casket funeral. She doesn't seem to know anything about the deceased, which is unusual because when I was an assistant funeral director, we at least knew cause of death. Um, we also, I would be involved in the embalming and stuff, but I don't know. Maybe, like I said, maybe this is a weird fantasy, not realistic version, and whatever. I'm just, tooting my own horn here. So, anyways, no one shows up to the wake, and spooky stuff starts to happen, like knocking sounds inside the casket. And finally, one dude does show up, and he does a weird like chant in like Hungarian or something. Segment largely fluctuates between Haley being bored or Haley being spooked by scary noises until finally it's obvious that there is something inside the casket very much moving around. She panics and tries to flee the building, discovers that the doors are chained shut. Also, there's a B plot kind of thing that's been going on in the background where there's a storm a brewing, and now there's a tornado warning. And she goes back to the main room where the wake is being held, and the casket's knocked over, and the dead guy, he's up and moving around. She's like, "Oh, Mr. Johnson or whatever, you were in an accident. There was a mix-up with the, we thought you were dead." And then he turns around and, "Oh, he's a zombie." And he kind of like chases her around a little bit, and then tornado hits the building, and final shot is like her standing up and dusting herself off and stumbling around. And I don't know if it's like she's in shock from the tornado or if she's now a zombie. Oh, segment's kind of a big nothing burger. In a way, it's kind of refreshing. It's a very grounded, in some ways, traditional horror story. It's quaint almost. Considering how out there this series has gotten, it's kind of a relief to have a nice little story like this. This is something that if it was in VHS 1 instead of like that stupid alien baby story, I'd be like, this is cool. I like this. But I don't know. There's not really a whole lot to say about this one. It's just okay. It's very middle of the road. There's some cool. The zombie looks pretty cool though. I'll give them that. I will give them that. And there's some like mystery that's kind of interesting to think about because like they don't really give an explanation. There's like hints about what he is, but it's never fully explained. But it's a neat little story. Also, like the found footage aspect of this is in that they're filming the wake, which is kind of weird because like when I worked at the funeral home, no one ever asked to have their wake recorded. It's just odd. Just because like funeral homes are like super heavily monitored. Like they have like tons of security cameras. They could have just done this as like a security camera kind of story. That would have made more sense like diegetically to me. I don't know. Maybe like normies don't think that funeral homes would be like Fort Knox, but they really are because dealing with like loved ones as well as potential biohazards as well as very expensive and dangerous chemicals and there's oftentimes jewelry and personal belongings that are irreplaceable as well as tons of very sensitive paperwork. So funeral homes they're very well protected. So there's that. Other than that, I mean, I'm just kind of like filling out time here. This is a boring. I don't want to be too hard. It's not boring. It's mediocre. It is what it is. I think I've said enough about this one. On to our next segment. Maybe I'll stick to the script on this one. We'll see. So for this next segment, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read verbatim the script I wrote for this. And it's funny because when I recorded myself saying that I will just stick to the script for this next one, I forgot what the next segment was. And then I looked at the script and I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of funny. So here we go. The subject, written and directed by Timo Tiahanto. Timo previously co-directed the segment Safe Haven from VHS 2, which is one of the best segments in the entire series. So does the subject compare to his previous success? No. In every one of these movies, there is usually at least one segment I heavily truncate, either because it would be too difficult to describe an extended action sequence, or because I don't feel it deserves a full examination. This is both. The TLDR version of this segment is an Indonesian mad scientist is kidnapping people and filming himself conducting horrible experiments on them to turn them into cyborg monstrosities. Protagonist is a woman referred to as SA. She has her head replaced with a camera. The mad scientist goes to wipe her memory, and a bunch of Indonesian special operators roll in and light up the dock. When they find SA, they bicker about whether they should help her out or put her down. Turns out the doc had a failsafe in his lab, though, and the explosion rocks the facility, and to make matters worse, one of the doc's other experiments, basically a soldat from Resident Evil 8, wakes up. We then get SA's extremely video gamey escape through the facility, being chased by that soldat and the soldiers who think she is a monster. At one point, she discovers a weapon attachment for her arm stump and takes out a few soldiers with it. Eventually, her, the commander of the commandos, and the big mean robot man all end up in one room and duke it out. She survives. The end. This segment is lame. The fact that her head has been replaced with a camera, for some reason treated as somewhat of a surprise, I spelled surprise wrong, despite the fact that most of the story is seen from her perspective and her vision. I just want to point out that surprise is spelt wrong, but autocorrect didn't pick it up. Why didn't autocorrect pick that up? That's not a word. Oh god, where am I? Surprise, despite the fact that most of the story is seen from her perspective and her vision is like that of an old-timey camcorder. I don't know how else someone could possibly interpret that. Also, the battery meter on the display essentially functions as her life bar, as if this was a video game. I don't know how we go from a masterpiece of Safe Haven to this. The effects are also horribly inconsistent in this segment. Some elements look great, others look like, well, a video game. This ain't it, Chief. Also, I know big sin this segment commits, that's not a sentence, is that this entire film is supposed to be set in 1994, and every other segment does a pretty good job of conveying that one way or the other. This one doesn't even try. The least they could have done is slap a filter of some kind over the footage. Instead, we get crystal clear HD footage and high-tech cyborgs. I do want to give some kudos to the actor who plays the Doctor character. According to IMDb, this is his only film role. I can't speak Indonesian, so I'm not sure how good his line delivery is, but his physical acting, pretty great. Well, that's all I wrote for this subject, titled The Subject. Yeah, it's a bad segment. It's not, I mean, I can see people liking this one. It's kind of fun, but it doesn't have that same kind of fun action-y feel that Bone Storm or Dante the Great have. It's not good. This is definitely on the lower end. Moving on. Our final segment is titled Terror. It is written and directed by Ryan Prowse, another name new to me. We begin with a shot of what is obviously some kind of snow-covered compound. An alarm is going off, and two militia members put out their cigarettes and follow their commandant inside the ramshackle facility that seems to be converted from an old barn. They go upstairs into an old hayloft. The walls are lined with wooden crosses and cloves of garlic. There is a small wooden prison cell in the back. Inside, a man can be heard whimpering and begging for his life as the militiamen fiddle with the locks. Inside, there is a weeping man chained on the floor. They enter, guns ready. The commandant says a prayer and blows the begging man's brains out. The man slumps to the ground. The men leave the room. What an opening! We then cut to footage of the militia members training and doing drills out in the snow, while the commandant gives a speech about how America is plagued with a cancer, and it is up to these true American patriots to take the country back, which they intend to do with their secret weapon, which they believe was delivered directly from God. We then get footage of them scouting out a federal building, making notes of various security features. They discuss their plans on how they will get the quote-unquote beast inside the building. There is some contention amongst the men whether or not there will get enough sunlight inside the front of the building. As they drive around the corner, one of the members of the militia mentions that the building has a daycare in it. This gives the commandant some pause, but he seems to steel himself pretty quickly and mentions upon seeing the back that they should use the loading docks as there's plenty of sunlight getting in through there. After thinking it over, the commandant states that this is where we roll in and detonate the abomination. Now, some context for the Zoomers in the audience. On April 19th, 1995, a domestic terrorist attack was carried out on the Alfred P. Murrow Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The attack was carried out primarily by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, though there is some reason to believe that there was a third man involved, though he was never identified. McVeigh and Nichols had ties to various underground right-wing militia movements that had been gaining traction in the early 90s. A total of 168 people died in that blast, many of which were children inside the daycare of the building. We cut back to the compound, and the alarm is going off again. We once again see that same man we saw before who got shot in the head. This seems like different footage, but how is this man still alive? He's still begging for his life, and we see him once again get shot in the head, though this is clearly a different instance. What is going on here? Cut to a pickup truck entering the compound. The truck driver meets the commandant. He's a very familiar-looking man. We get the impression that the commandant and the mysterious man know each other, though from the way they talk. He shows his cargo to the men, and it reveals that he has come to bring them weapons. It turns out this man is a policeman. Not any policeman. He is Slater from the framing narrative? Like, not just like the same actor, but the same character. It's very weird. It's directly referenced, actually, in the framing narrative. I didn't mention it when I was covering that segment because I didn't want to spoil this segment at that point, though I don't think that really matters because we're doing spoilers. But they deliberately, like, mention that, like, one of the female cult members at the end of the framing narrative segment specifically says, "Oh, that was you in that film we saw." So it's like, wow, that's weird. This is the first time in this franchise we've had, like, a character from a segment appear in a framing narrative, or vice versa. Well, I mean, like, we've seen, like, pictures of characters before, or, like, footage from previous films, but we've never had a character deliberately cross over. It's weird that we've gone this long and this happens. It's just interesting. I don't know. Anyways, he's there to deliver some weapons, and he tells them that a lot of the cops are on their side, and that they're gonna be with them when stuff goes down. This kind of gives the Commandant a lot of hope. He seems really buoyed by the support, and he decides to give a speech on what seems to be the eve of victory. When someone asks him if they've tested that the weapon will work, if the creature works, this kind of causes him to freeze up a moment. We then cut to the alarm going off again. That man is again in the cell, once more begging for mercy, once again shot in the head, this time by pistol. A man with safety goggles, an apron, and rubbery gloves brings in a funnel and a bucket. Slumped over man's head is tilted into the funnel, and the blood is drained into the bucket. We then cut to outside, and we see the man with the personal protection equipment on. He's holding a white rabbit out in the snow, and he's holding a syringe containing the blood. He injects the poor rabbit with the solution and puts it in a cage. It's obvious that the sun is swiftly approaching as night is giving way to day. The men back away, and from a safe distance away, the Commandant watches on. Sunlight hits the cage, and at first, the Commandant panics a little bit because it doesn't seem like anything's happening. But then, just as soon as he began to panic, the cage explodes in a massive fireball. It seems it's a success. The men begin to cheer. Poor rabbit, R.I.P. Now, if you're unfamiliar with, like, any kind of horror tropes or anything, you may not have figured it out yet, but if you have, like, above lukewarm IQ, you probably have that what we're dealing with is a vampire, and vampire blood apparently explodes in this universe. That's right, we're dealing with explosive vampires. We cut to the siren again, and once again, the vampire in the cage is shot in the head. We then cut to footage of the men testing the contraption they intend to deliver their weapon in. It's essentially a steel cage with wooden panels all around it, and the idea is that with the press of a button, the wooden panels will give away, exposing the vampire inside to the sunlight. If just a small amount of blood inside a wee little rabbit can cause a massive fireball, imagine what a full-bodied vampire would be capable of. However, the contraption does not seem to work as intended, which causes much frustration within group. Perhaps to buoy everyone's spirits, he announces that we are, quote-unquote, going to get fucking wasted. The men drink that night and party, all except for Steve. Steve is left on guard duty. He has to monitor the beast. It's a lonely job just sitting there watching a whimpering man from a camera. Some other hooligans decide to go and bother him and taunt him. It seems like Steve is the whipping boy of the group. It's obvious from his demeanor and his black eye that he's kind of a beaten dog. And while at first he sticks to his duty, when they call his courage into question, this seems to cause him to change his tune and he abandons his post. The drunken hooligan insists that they go inside the beast's cage and kind of fuck around with him, I guess. Just, whatever, as you do. Predictably, this does not end well, and before you know it, Steve's got some vampire blood in his mouth and all over his body. We cut to that all too familiar klaxon sound. The men rouse themselves from their drunken stupor to investigate the cause of the alarm. As they make their way out into the snow, they find one of their comrades dead on the ground, his throat apparently cut open. One of the men jumps on the back of a pickup truck and mounts the weapon there like it's Halo, and points it at the barn. They realize that Steve was supposed to be on duty last night and that he seems to be missing, so they call out to him. Their call is answered by the drunken man Bob. To mention his name was Bob, by the way, the drunk guy. His head comes flying out of the barn. This causes the dude on the truck to light it up. He starts firing wildly at the barn. However, he can't control the recoil of the heavy weapon, and friendly fire ensues. Until El Commandant takes an executive action and executes the man. Steve begins to fumble out of the barn. The men notice that he's covered in blood, and they call out him to stop. Go back in, you're covered in monster blood. You know what'll happen. He doesn't listen, or doesn't care. He steps into the sunlight and explodes. The Commandant says that they need to go inside and destroy the unholy abomination before it's too late. Because if they don't take that thing out before sundown, it'll be too late. The last 4 militiamen go in, guns ready, and camera ready. At this point, you should stop filming, but we need someone to be, or else we wouldn't know what happens, I guess. But anyways, they go inside the barn, and we get a glimpse of what the vampire looks like in its true form. This ain't no Bela Lugosi Dracula, my friends. This is a horrible, giant, gaping maw, bulbous-headed creature. It's something. You really should check it out. I mean, this thing it's not the best effect in terms of quality, but it's the dark shots of it are pretty creepy. The group is whittled down till it's just one man and the Commandant and then the vampire. The final man before the Commandant accidentally shoots El Comandante in the leg and before getting dispatched. So with just one man left, the Commandant and the vampire, the creature grabs him, drags him into the pen he was kept in for so long, walks out, slams on the panic button, which causes the roof to give out, showering the room in sunlight and just exploderating everything. And this is a fantastic segment. Um, I really like this one. It's got a lot of interesting things going on. It's definitely the most political in that there is actual, like, kind of indirect and direct references to things that actually happened. One thing I found pretty interesting about the segment was how it handled the portrayal of the militiamen. I wouldn't exactly say it presents them as sympathetic characters, but I do actually appreciate how they could have gone really heavy-handed with this, but they chose not to. Because you run the risk if you make these guys just like absolute characters and just have them spouting slurs 24/7 and just being like snarling, sneering monsters, you run the risk of just making it like, well, okay, I just want the vampire to win. And I hate that in horror. I hate when a horror film goes out of its way to make you root for the monster. I never want to root for the monster. Monsters exist to be slain, and nothing grinds my gears more than humans are the real monsters. I hate it so much. And it's important to remember that, like, yeah, humans can be awful. They can do bad things, but they're still humans. Even if you don't like someone, they still probably have friends that they joke around with. And before I get myself in any trouble, it's just, like, like, it's like when they raided Osama bin Laden's compound and they took his laptop and he had a bunch of, like, anime and video games on it. It's like some of which you've probably played or watched. Also, tying this into like Waco and Ruby Ridge and the Oklahoma City and stuff like that, it it kind of really drives home the 1994 aspect of this. That's what I got to say about Terror. So, in conclusion, let's kind of sum up the movie as a whole. VHS 94, I would say, is the weakest film in the series, were it not for VHS 1 kind of shitting the bed after the first segment. So it's probably the second worst. I mean, I assume that the Web B series or whatever that I haven't seen is probably worse. I don't know, but I can't really comment on that at this time. But I mean, the segments in this film aren't awful. I mean, I don't even think the subject is that bad of a segment. I think it's just not for me. I really wanted some good horror, and I think I set my expectations a little bit high given how great Safe Haven is, but it's I can see people enjoying it. It's just not for me. And I mean, I would definitely recommend this film if you're a person who likes found footage. You'll like it, I think. Stands in contrast to VHS 2 and VHS Viral, though. I feel like those films, I would recommend those to anyone, even if you don't necessarily consider yourself a fan of found footage. If you're just a fan of horror films in general, those movies really stand up. Whereas this one, it's a bit more of an acquired taste, I would say. Um, that's kind of what I've got to say about this one. I think after this, I'm going to take a break from VHS, and I think I'm going to maybe do a video game video. Stay tuned for that, and subscribe. Recommend this video to your friends, family, and clergy.
Smash that like button.
Ring the bell. And remember, folks, that I love you very much. You're a great person. Thank you for listening. And
Hail Ratma.